If I hadn't needed to use the bathroom that night, a man would have been murdered, and I would have delivered his last meal. I didn't know that yet. All I knew was that my van's AC had died hours earlier. I was 11 hours into my shift, and I had one delivery left. The address took me to a strip mall that looked abandoned. Most of the stores were boarded up. No cars, no people. Just one flickering streetlight and a single unit at the far end with its windows completely covered from the inside. The order said Unit 7, no business name, no lights, and no reason anyone should have been ordering food that late. I almost left. That decision, that moment of hesitation, is the only reason this story ends the way it does. I checked the order again. Unit 7, a small office space wedged between an abandoned dry cleaner and what used to be a nail salon. The windows were papered over from the inside, and there was no sign indicating what kind of business operated there, if any business operated there at all. I grabbed the food and approached the door, my footsteps echoing in the empty parking lot. When I knocked, the sound seemed to die immediately, swallowed by the thick summer air. No answer. I knocked again, harder this time, and waited. Nothing. I pulled out my phone and dialed the customer. After several rings, a man answered, his voice tight and strained. "Yeah, I'm coming. Just give me 5 minutes. I'm stuck in traffic." "No problem," I said, though something about his tone set me on edge. He didn't sound stuck in traffic. He sounded scared. I leaned against the wall, willing myself to stay awake. My bladder was screaming at me. I'd been holding it for the last hour, pushing through delivery after delivery. There had to be a gas station nearby, but the thought of leaving and potentially missing the customer made me hesitate. Then I noticed the narrow alley between Unit 7 and the nail salon. Dark, secluded, and mercifully hidden from the street. I glanced around the empty parking lot one more time before slipping into the shadows. The relief was immediate but short-lived. As I stood there in the darkness, I heard something, a soft, rhythmic sound. Breathing, not my own. My blood turned to ice. Slowly I turned my head and saw him, a figure pressed against the back door of Unit 7, partially obscured by a dumpster. He was holding something in his hands, something metallic that caught the faint light from the street lamp. A crowbar. Our eyes met for one frozen moment. Then he moved. He didn't run toward me or away. He moved toward the door, raising the crowbar. In that split second, instinct took over. I shouted, "Hey, what are you doing?" He spun around, and I saw his face clearly now. Young, maybe mid-20s, with wild eyes and a desperate expression. He looked at me, then at the door, then back at me. For a moment, I thought he might attack. Instead, he dropped the crowbar with a clatter and bolted, disappearing into the maze of buildings behind the strip mall. My hands were shaking as I zipped up and stumbled back toward the front of the building. That's when I heard it, a muffled sound from inside Unit 7. A voice. Someone was in there. I pressed my ear to the door. "Hello, is someone there?" The voice came again, clearer now. "Help, please, someone help me." I tried the door handle, locked. I pulled out my phone and called 911, my words tumbling out in a rush as I explained the situation. The dispatcher told me to stay on the line, that help was coming, but the voice inside was growing more frantic. "He's coming back. Please, you have to get me out." I looked around desperately and spotted the crowbar where the man had dropped it. Without thinking, I grabbed it and wedged it into the doorframe, throwing all my weight against it. The wood splintered, and on my third try, the door burst open. Inside, I found him, the customer who had placed the order. He was zip-tied to a chair in what looked like a makeshift office, his face bruised and swollen. Blood trickled from a cut above his eyebrow. "He took my phone," the man gasped. "Ordered food with it. He was going to..." His voice broke. "He was going to kill me." The sound of sirens filled the air, growing louder by the second. I stayed with him until the police arrived, cutting through the zip ties with a box cutter I found on the desk. Later, the officers told me the man in the alley had a warrant out for armed robbery. The victim owed him money, they said, and he'd lured him to the empty office to settle the debt permanently. If I hadn't been there, if I hadn't needed to step into that alley at that exact moment. I drove home as the sun began to rise, my hands still trembling on the steering wheel. Sometimes fate puts you exactly where you need to be, even when you don't realize it. And sometimes the smallest, most embarrassing moments become the difference between life and death. Marcus and I had been urban explorers for about a year, documenting abandoned places around the city with our cameras and posting the photos online. We'd been through old factories, shuttered schools, even a decaying shopping mall. But the Riverside Apartments was different. A 12-story building that had been condemned after a fire 3 years earlier, its windows boarded up and wrapped in chain-link fencing, plastered with warning signs. Marcus found a gap in the fence behind the dumpsters. 5 minutes, he said, already squeezing through. Just the lobby and maybe one floor. We'll get some shots and leave. I should have trusted my gut. The moment we slipped through that fence, something felt wrong. The air seemed heavier, charged with an energy that made the hair on my arms stand up. But Marcus was already inside, and I wasn't about to let him go alone. The lobby was a disaster. Water-stained walls, collapsed ceiling tiles, and trash scattered across the floor. Our flashlights cut through the darkness, revealing graffiti and the skeletal remains of what had once been a reception desk. The smell of mold and burnt plastic filled my nostrils. "This place is perfect," Marcus whispered, snapping photos with his camera. "Look at that light coming through the boarded windows." I nodded, but my attention was elsewhere. I kept hearing sounds, not the settling of an old building or wind through broken windows, but deliberate sounds. Footsteps, movement, something that suggested we weren't alone. "Did you hear that?" I asked. Marcus lowered his camera. "Hear what?" Before I could answer, we heard it clearly. A scraping sound from the stairwell, like something heavy being dragged across concrete. We both froze, our flashlights pointing toward the darkness beyond the lobby. "Probably just rats," Marcus said, but his voice had lost its confidence. The scraping stopped, replaced by footsteps descending the stairs, slow, uneven footsteps that echoed in the empty building. Then a voice, raspy and harsh, like someone who hadn't spoken in years. "You shouldn't be here." A figure emerged from the stairwell. In our flashlight beams, we could see he was a man, or had been once. His clothes were filthy, his beard matted and tangled, his eyes sunken deep into his skull. But it was his hands that made my stomach turn. They were covered in dark stains, and he was holding a length of pipe wrapped in duct tape. "Building's condemned," he said, taking a step toward us. "But I live here, this is my home, and you're trespassing." Marcus and I exchanged a glance. This wasn't just some homeless person seeking shelter. There was something calculated in his movements, something predatory in the way he positioned himself between us and the exit. "We're sorry," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We didn't know anyone was here. We're leaving right now." "Too late for that," the man said, and his mouth twisted into something that might have been a smile. "You've seen me. You've seen my home. Can't have you running to tell anyone about it." He took another step forward, raising the pipe slightly. In that moment, I realized with crystal clarity that this man had been living in this condemned building, hidden from the world for who knows how long, and we had stumbled into his territory. Marcus moved first. He grabbed my arm and pulled me toward a side corridor away from the main entrance. "Go, go, go!" We ran, our flashlights bouncing wildly as we sprinted through the darkness. Behind us, we could hear the man giving chase, his footsteps pounding against the floor, his voice echoing through the empty building. "You can't leave. There's nowhere to go." The corridor led to what had been a maintenance area. We crashed through a door and found ourselves in a concrete room filled with old pipes and electrical panels. At the far end was a window, not boarded up, but reinforced with metal bars. But between the bars was just enough space, just barely wide enough. "There!" Marcus shouted, already climbing onto a maintenance table beneath the window. He squeezed through, his jacket catching on the bars before he pulled himself free and dropped to the ground outside. I was right behind him, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst. The footsteps were getting closer, and I could hear the man's breathing. Could hear him calling out threats that made my blood run cold. I pushed myself through the bars, feeling them scrape against my ribs, tearing my shirt. For one horrible moment, I thought I was stuck, but Marcus grabbed my arms and pulled, and I tumbled through, landing hard on the pavement outside. We ran. We didn't stop until we were 6 blocks away, gasping for air in the parking lot of a 24-hour convenience store. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely pull out my phone to call the police. When they arrived, we told them everything. They found evidence that someone had been living in the building, makeshift sleeping areas, stockpiled food and water, and something else. Something we hadn't seen in our panicked flight. In one of the rooms on the 3rd floor, they found a collection of wallets, phones, and IDs. Dozens of them, all from people who'd gone missing in the area over the past 2 years. People who'd been exploring, photographing, or just passing by the wrong building at the wrong time. The man was never found. Despite searches, K9 units, and thermal imaging, he'd vanished into the urban landscape as completely as if he'd never existed. But the evidence told the story. We'd stumbled into the hunting ground of someone who'd been preying on urban explorers just like us. Sometimes I think about how close we came. If we'd gone to the 2nd floor instead of the lobby, if that window hadn't been there, if Marcus had hesitated even a second longer. We never explored another abandoned building. Some places are abandoned for good reason, and some of them aren't as empty as they appear. That's a lesson we learned the hard way. Though unlike the people whose IDs were found in that building, at least we lived to learn it. The university library closed at midnight, but my work didn't end there. As a night custodian, I had the place to myself from 12 to 6. 6 hours of mopping floors, emptying trash, and wandering through the stacks in a building that felt less like a place of learning and more like a mausoleum once the students left. The basement was the worst part. That's where they kept the special collections, rare books, archival materials, documents that hadn't been touched in decades. The air down there was different. Stale, heavy with the smell of old paper and leather bindings. The lights were dim to protect the materials, casting everything in a yellowish gloom that made shadows pool in the corners. I was restocking cleaning supplies in my closet near the archives when I heard footsteps on the stairs. Slow, measured steps, not the hurried clip of a student who'd forgotten something or the confident stride of a professor working late. A man appeared at the bottom of the stairs, pausing when he saw me. He was middle-aged, wearing a wrinkled dress shirt and slacks that looked like they'd been slept in. His eyes were bloodshot, ringed with dark circles, and when he looked at me, something about his gaze made my stomach tighten. "Building's closed," I said, trying to sound authoritative despite being alone with this stranger in an empty basement. He nodded slowly but didn't move toward the stairs. "I know, I was hoping—" He paused, licking his lips. "I need access to the restricted archives, the locked section." The restricted archives held the library's most valuable and sensitive materials. First editions, rare manuscripts, personal papers donated by prominent families. Access required special permission, appointments made weeks in advance, and supervision by the head archivist. The room was climate-controlled, alarmed, and kept locked at all times. "You'll need to come back during business hours and fill out a request form," I said, my hand instinctively moving toward my phone in my pocket. The man took a step closer. In the dim light, I could see a sheen of sweat on his forehead despite the basement's chill. "I can't wait that long. I need to see them tonight." "The materials, which collection are you researching?" He waved his hand dismissively, as if my question was irrelevant. "All of them, any of them. I just need to be in that room, alone, just for an hour, maybe 2. The words sent ice through my veins. He didn't want to see specific documents. He wanted to be alone in a locked room containing items worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. "That's not possible," I said firmly. "The room is locked and I don't have access." This was partially true. I had a master key for cleaning purposes, but I was explicitly forbidden from entering the restricted archives unsupervised. His expression shifted, desperation creeping into his features. "I can pay you, cash, $1,000. Just let me in and look the other way for a couple hours." $1,000. more than 2 weeks of my salary. But everything about this felt wrong. The late hour, his agitation, the way he wouldn't meet my eyes directly, as if he was afraid I might see something there. "I can't do that, you need to leave." His jaw clenched, and for a moment I thought he might try to push past me toward the archives. My hand closed around my phone, ready to call campus security. "Please," he said, and now there was something raw in his voice. "You don't understand, I need to be near them. The old things, the dead things, just for a little while." The dead things, the phrase made my skin crawl. These were just books, documents, letters from people long gone, but the way he said it, the hunger in his voice, suggested he saw them as something else entirely. "Leave now, or I'm calling security." He stared at me for a long moment, his hands opening and closing at his sides. Then, without another word, he turned and climbed the stairs, his footsteps echoing in the stairwell. I waited until I heard the exterior door close before pulling out my phone with shaking hands. Campus security arrived within 10 minutes, and when I described the man, the officer's expression grew grim. "You're the third person who's reported him this semester," she said. "He's tried to bribe his way into the biology department's specimen storage, the museum's artifact vault, and now this. We've banned him from campus, but he keeps finding ways back in." "What does he want?" She shook her head. "We're not sure, but every place he's tried to access has one thing in common. They all contain old things, preserved things, things that used to be alive but aren't anymore." I thought about the restricted archives, about the collections of personal papers from prominent families, letters, journals, photographs of people who'd been dead for a century or more. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. "We've increased patrols," the officer continued, "but if you see him again, call immediately. Don't engage." For the rest of that shift, I couldn't bring myself to go back down to the basement. I stayed on the main floors, cleaning the same bathrooms twice, reorganizing supply closets that didn't need it, anything to avoid those dim corridors and locked rooms. Even now, months later, I feel a chill every time I descend those stairs. The restricted archives remain locked, their contents safely sealed away. But I can't stop thinking about that man's face, the desperate hunger in his eyes, the way he'd called them dead things, as if the documents themselves were corpses he needed to commune with. Sometimes I wonder if he's still out there, still trying to find his way into darkened rooms where old things sleep. And sometimes, late at night, when the building is empty and the shadows grow long, I wonder what he would have done if I'd said yes.